Question, is the president engaging in mission creep? Should we be supporting the Kurds with arms and advisors as we are currently doing? Is America being sucked into another war in Iraq? Eleanor Clift.
No. Mission creep is when the nature of the objective changes and when you really do pour in a lot of added resources. I think it's very clear that he's doing everything he can to restrain our involvement. It's a humanitarian mission. I think we could, as a country, we can be rightly proud that the humanitarian intervention has helped and the military strikes have helped. And there was another bit of good news this week, and that is Prime Minister Maliki has stepped down, and there's a new Prime Minister in Iraq who now has 30 days to form a government. So you do have a unity, the potential of a unity government there that may be, more equipped for the fight. And also the fact that the Brits and the French are coming in. The Brits are going to supply arms to the Kurds. I mean, I think that they're the best fighters over there, and so I'm not going to say things are in hand. I mean, it's a chaotic situation. But there's more good news this week than there has been for a while.
U.S. air power can keep the ISIS, the Islamic State, out of Erbil. It can keep them out of Baghdad. But there are no ground forces, Iraqi or Kurdish now, who can take back Anbar province or can take back northern Syria. So you're going to have an Islamic State there festering and growing unless you get some ground troops from someone. And the logical place for them to come would be the Turks and the Syrians and the Kurds and the Iraqis together, but that would take a diplomat of Bismarck's capacity to pull that crowd together.
Okay, who is supporting the U.S. in its mission to Iraq?
Answer, our key allies, but with important qualifiers. Here's the Commander-in-Chief.
I want to thank, in particular, the United Kingdom, France, and other countries working with us to provide much-needed assistance to the Iraqi people.
But while only France is now providing arms to the Kurds, other American key allies, including Britain and Canada, are supplying only humanitarian aid. But British Prime Minister Cameron is considering equipping the Kurds to fight. And Britain's defense minister under the former Labour government says Britain and the U.S. should join in airstrikes against ISIL. But for now, direct military strikes are being left solely to American air crews.
Question, is this further proof that America, whether we like it or not, has once again donned the uniform of the world's solitary policeman? If so, how can we persuade our allies to better support us? Tom Rogan.
I think it is true. I think that if you look at the dynamics on the ground, the reality is that American air crews are the only ones putting themselves in harm's way, flying the direct strike missions against ISIL. And the simple fact is that the Europeans, although they're now beginning to provide arms, have very little interest in doing more than that because they believe that the United States can fulfill that role. And I think it's a big problem going forwards because Americans are getting sick of it.
Wait a minute. What's the exit strategy?
How does the U.S. compel them to get them involved? No. Or how does the U.S. get out of Iraq? Well, to get the Europeans involved, I think we have to talk about realigning our bases from Germany into Eastern Europe because there's a little flowback.
If the U.S. gets out, you've got an Islamic State that's going to be festering there. But somebody's got to go in and clean that out.
But here's the thing.
Nobody has told me who's going to do it.
Do you favor that?
No, the Americans aren't going to do it with ground troops, and you need ground troops.
But here's the thing. With Anbar province, one of the hopeful things over the longer term is that the belief in Islam, even there with the Sunni community, it's Hanbali versus Hanafi Islam. Essentially, ISIL are fanatical much more than the people of Anbar. So over the longer term, what will happen is that, like Al-Qaeda in Iraq, they will lose their support on the ground because they can't stop themselves from going and crucifying people.
Hold on, I'll let you in a minute. Okay, the Iraq toll, March 2003 to December 2011.
U.S. soldiers killed, 4,425. U.S. soldiers wounded in action, 31,947. U.S. soldiers with serious brain or spinal injuries, 20%. U.S. soldiers with serious mental health problems, 30%. War cost $806 billion. Money lost or unaccounted for, $9 billion. U.S. veteran care, $894 billion. Iraqis killed, military and civilian, 134,000.
Why did I read these numbers?
Well, you want to illustrate just that this is, if there is another intervention, it's not going to be cheap, and that's exactly right. But the other issue is, it's what I call the lesser of two evils, okay? What happens if Iraq becomes a radical state opposing all of our allies in the region, that is in the heart of the entire energy world of that part of the world, which is critical to the entire Western economy? We simply cannot just sit by and let that happen.
How likely is that?
How likely is what?
What you just assumed or presented?
If we don't get involved, you're going to have a radical Kurdish community up there that is going to expand. They're by far the toughest fighters. Everybody will lose hope that we are going to back them, and you will have the possibility there of a major unraveling of the American and world position in that part of the world.
You have to this is why I think in the short term it's an urgent threat. Over the long term, I think it resolves itself because they lose support, but in the short term, it forces the sectarian dynamics underway to become politicized. It forces people to in corners, and more than that, talking about the direct threat of ISIS.
The Peshmergas are good fighters. We're now helping them. The Brits are helping them.
Start again.
Right. It's Iraq's fight. They have a new government. There's a potential of them getting their act together. The Peshmergas are good fighters. The Europeans are now going to supply some weapons. The U.S. is not going to go back into Iraq.
All right, thank you, General Cliff.
The Kurds are going to defend Kurdistan, and they're not going to defend anything else.
Exit question on a direct threat to national interest scale. Threat to national interest. You got it? 0 to 10. How much of a threat does the Islamic State pose to American interests? 0 to 10.
If there was a terrorist threat that, say, now is about a 3, I think this, if they establish that, takes it up to a 6.
Eleanor.
5.
What do you want to go with?
Yeah, no, I'm at an 8. I mean, I think this is an unbelievably serious threat to the United States and to all of our allies and to the world of energy.
I think it's an 8 because of the regional dynamics. The Sunni Arab monarchies will go full in support of not ISIS, but other groups similar to them. The Iranians will go on the flip side to Hezbollah and different groups like AAH in Iraq. And also for the United States, with the European passport holders who have learnt from Snowden, specific fact, they know to stay off the internet, off the grid, they will go back home, they will smile at their neighbors, and then Western intelligence services will fear that they will get on planes to come to the United States. I don't. No. I'm not talking. I'm talking about interlocutor relations. But I'm talking about more than just throwing a few bombs.
That you want to do.
Relationship building instead of just bombing.
Is protecting American interests if he doesn't make that work.
I'll climb it to a 10. Issue 3. Out of Africa.
I stand before you as the President of the United States and a proud American. I also stand before you as the son of a man from Africa. The blood of Africa runs through our family, and so for us, the bonds between our countries, our continents, are deeply personal.
Leaders of nearly 50 African nations gathered in Washington, D.C. last week for the U.S. African Leaders Summit. The 3-day affair spanned a panoply of issues ranging from education and political tolerance to trade and investment. By the summit's end, Mr. Obama announced $33 billion in new U.S. corporate spending, philanthropic aid, and foreign aid for Africa. Last year, two-way trade between the U.S. and Africa totaled $96 billion. In contrast, Africa's trade with China, its biggest trading partner, was double that at almost $200 billion. Business in Africa may boom in our 21st century. Population growth rates are higher in Africa than on any other continent, and it has a large youthful population. Africa's middle class is already bigger than India's, giving it the potential to become one of the world's bigger consumer markets. And Chinese companies, from telecommunications to automakers, are targeting Africa as the next big thing for Beijing's export-dominated economy. Quote, China is making a long bet on the emergence of vibrant, high-consuming middle classes there, and with each year, this wager is looking smarter and smarter, unquote. So says Howard French, author of China's Second Continent, how 1 million migrants are building a new empire in Africa.
Why does President Obama want to boost trade with Africa? Is it to compete with China's growing influence in Africa? Okay. What?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's the reason. I mean, Africa is an improving and a dynamic area of the world, but it's nowhere near the kind of size at this stage of the game that's going to have a major effect either on our exports, on our economy, or indeed on the world. But it's an area that we should nurture for good reasons, and we will.
Six of the 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. Cell phones, smartphones, the energy grid. I mean, there's such potential there for American Africa growth, and this country is probably 15 years behind Africa, has gone in there and basically is ripping off a lot of their natural resources. And I think the president is basically saying, you know, we're not totally altruistic, but we can give the Africans a better deal than they're going to get from the Chinese.
He also has an emotional attachment to the third world and to Africa in particular. But clearly the Chinese are drawing all the resources out of Africa while we put our money into foreign aid and helping cure AIDS and other diseases. A lot of soft, what you might call the exercise of soft power. But I think also he sees that as us competitive there. But you know, the population of Africa is over 1 billion. It'll be 2 billion at middle century and 4 billion at the end of this century, 67 years.
And they're all going to want smartphones.
You know what, Pat?
86
Africa is exciting. Think about it. Okay, Americans and Africans share a similar work ethic.
In a recent Gallup survey, 85% of Africans said hard work pays off. In North America, 84% agreed. By contrast, the European Union is 17% below Africa and North America. In the EU, get this, a mere 67% think that hard work is rewarded.
Tom Rogan.
Yeah, I think that shared work ethic is important between the two continents, North America and Africa. But more than that, the rule of law that the United States can bring to bear as a democracy, as a country that has a developed justice system, is something that Africa will find increasingly important and that China will not provide and has no interest in providing because of the nature of their government. And so going forwards over the longer term, and I think that's what this is, it's about a slow process. That is something that helps both continents, and it does so in economic ways that hopefully...
Symbol of change is Rwanda. We think of genocide, Hotel Rwanda. Rwanda is now come back. It's a thriving country. It's where there's a lot of promise and American investment. Just Rwanda is really the analogy for the potential of Africa.
Prediction, Pat.
The Ferguson, Missouri racial crisis metastasizes this week.
Eleanor.
Ferguson, Missouri is calming down with the release of the police officer who committed the crime. Justice will prevail.
Tom.
Expect significant changes in the aftermath of Ferguson in terms of federal government transfers of military equipment to local and state police forces.
Mark.
Foreign policy will become a major issue in the presidential election as a result exactly of what we've been talking about.
President Obama's liberal true believers will be so nettled at Hillary's jabs at the Obama foreign policy legacy that they will redouble their efforts to persuade Senator Elizabeth Warren to run against Hillary for the Democratic nomination in 2016. Bye-bye.